Well, that was a very kind introduction, Yoshi. Thank you very much for that. I have the pleasure today to moderate the first panel session. And as you know, the IAIS recently completed a consultation on revisions to several of the ICPs and the ComFrame materials that have been incorporated into those ICPs. And today we'll share with you some of the high-level themes that were noted in the responses to the consultation, as well as we'll update you on where we are with the insurance capital standard. So today I have with me, the panel is made up of the chairs of the various working groups of the Financial Stability Technical Committee, who together with their working groups drafted the revisions to the ICPs and worked on the integration. First, we have Ryan Workman. Ryan is my colleague from the NAIC, and he is chair of the Supervisory Material Review Group. We also have with us today Tom Crossland. He's from the Bank of England, and he is chair of the Insurance Group's Working Group. Next, we have Urs Halbeisen from FINMA. Urs is the vice chair of the Financial Stability and Technical Committee, and he is also chair of the Resolution Working Group. Next, we'll hear from Anik Tugner from DNB, who is chair of the IAIS Governance Working Group. Welcome, Anik. And last, and certainly not least, is Paolo Cadoni, who is also from the Bank of England and chair of the Capital Solvency and Field Testing Working Group. So thank you all for being part of the panel today. Just some brief remarks from me to level set a bit before we invite the speakers up. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about how we got to our journey to where we got to today, and also some of the next steps for the future. And after I introduce each of the speakers, they'll take one or two questions from the audience. But since we have several speakers today, what we'll do is we'll take one or two questions after each speaker, and then we'll open the floor at the very end if we have time to more questions. Okay. So I put up on this slide the objectives of ComFrame, and this is not new to most of you, but it's helpful to just kind of remind everyone the context for this discussion. So ComFrame establishes international standards for effective supervision of internationally active insurance groups, and it builds on the high-level standards and guidance that are set out in the Insurance Core Principles. And just to remind everyone again that in this context, internationally active insurance groups, IAIGs, are defined as insurance groups that have total assets of 50 billion or gross written premium of at least 10 billion. In addition, the premium must be written in 3 or more jurisdictions, and at least 10% of the gross written premium has to be outside the home jurisdiction. So before I talk about the more recent work that is the subject of the panel today, let me quickly remind everyone about our journey up to this point. ComFrame, the concept of ComFrame, was originally released for public consultation in 2012. And over the next 3 years, there were public consultations in 2012, 13, and a revised draft published in 2014. And in 2013, the IAIS announced that as part of its efforts to develop standards for IAIGs, it would also embark on the development of a risk-based global insurance capital standard, or ICS. And the first consultation on the ICS was in December 2014, and that was followed by 3 consecutive years of field testing exercise and a second public consultation in 2016. So all this to say that a lot of work has been done leading up to this year in terms of building out ComFrame and developing the ICS. And that takes us up to this year, and particularly 2 important milestones that have been accomplished this year. The first one is the revised package of ICPs and ComFrame that was released for public consultation in March. And this consultation was particularly notable. It was a notable accomplishment in that it reflected the restructuring of ComFrame material, and for the first time integrated ComFrame materials directly into the ICPs on which the material builds. The second major milestone for this year was the ICS-related quantitative field testing exercise that was launched in March of 2017. And as Paolo will mention in more detail, this launch was followed by workshops in 3 major countries around the world. We had one in Rome, DC, Tokyo, and data is expected to be provided in September of this year and ready for analysis. And in just a few weeks, the IAIS will publish the details of ICS version 1.0 for extended field testing. So let me talk about now a little bit about what we still need to accomplish in the near term. First, as it relates to the March consultation on the ComFrame elements in particular that have been incorporated into ICPs 3, 10, 12, and 25, I expect most of the comments to be resolved in the first quarter of next year. The next wave of ComFrame materials to be integrated will be related to ICP 15, and that should hopefully be released also in the fourth quarter of this year. And next year, next year in 2018, we plan to have a public consultation mid-year on ComFrame and ICS version 2.0 with adoption planned, as you know, for 2019. So with all that, as well as a number of other high priority projects related to the delivery of ICS 2.0, it should all come together in 2022. So with that background, let's turn to the topic of this panel today. On this slide is where you see the elements of the March consultation that'll be discussed by our panelists. Now, the work is organized into 5 groups. You have the introduction and assessment methodology. Then you have the work organized into 4 major themes of supervisor and supervisory measures. You have supervisory cooperation coordination, governance, and resolution. So just some high-level observations. We actually had some excellent feedback on the ICPs and the ComFrame materials, both from stakeholders. I think we had 39 stakeholders and 15 members that have provided comments. In particular, there was a number of comments on ICP 12. I'm sure Urs will talk more about that. That's the ICP on resolution. And maybe just some overarching themes. We got very positive feedback on the integration, with several respondents noting that the new structure was clearer and more user-friendly. On clarity, we received a significant number of comments that suggest that some of the standard and guidance materials are not being interpreted quite as intended. So there we need to do further work to clarify the terminology as well as the content. We also posed some question on cost-benefit analysis. And I have to say there we didn't receive a lot of feedback relative to the other elements, so perhaps we need to take a closer look at how we pose the questions, and maybe we can get better responses there. So thank all of you who are in the audience today that took the time to comment. Really appreciate it. And now I'll turn the floor over to my panelist and call Ryan Workman to please come to the podium.
Thank you, Elise. So I'm going to be taking us through the revisions and the comments received on the ICP introduction, the introduction to ComFrame, as well as the assessment methodology. So just a brief recap of kind of what was done with respect to this material that went out for consultation in March. With respect to the ICP introduction, what we tried to do was to reorganize and revise a lot of the material that was within the original ICP introduction. There was some very key overarching concepts that underline all of the ICPs, and it's important for the reader to understand and keep in mind as they go through all of the ICPs, all of the standards. So these include just things about terminology, how certain terms are used throughout the ICPs, as well as how we use proportionality, which is obviously a very key concept to the ICPs. So with that, we tried to be more clear about what that means. We've kind of said that there's two facets. One is the implementation, and the other is on the application. So this has helped to better clarify the intentions of that concept, as well as hopefully be more clear that it is intended to apply throughout, but also reduce the reliance on that buzz phrase according to the nature, scale, and complexity, because a lot of time it was unclear what actually that meant. So we've asked the various working groups throughout their own ICPs to better translate those into real concepts instead of just using that expression. Another thing is what we did is to remove or relocate material that overlapped with the assessment methodology or other ICPs. So there was a subsection of the introduction that talked about the assessment methodology before the assessment methodology, which was rather confusing and duplicative, so we were able to remedy that. With respect to the ComFrame introduction, what we did was, given that the integration of the ComFrame material into the ICPs, we thought it was necessary to have a similar introduction with respect to ComFrame. So what we did was use material that was from the 2014 consultation document on ComFrame, and take the concepts from that were still relevant, and create a similar structured introduction for ComFrame. So we have similar explanations about how the structure of ComFrame works, and as well as using some of the overarching concepts that are key to ComFrame itself. And these are supposed to be in addition to those which apply to the ICPs. With respect to ICPs 9 and 10, the idea here was to provide some better clarity and consistency in the terms and concepts that were used throughout, as well as to try to make the standards more outcomes focused. And this is kind of a theme throughout all of the revisions of the ICPs, is we want to make our standards more outcomes focused so that they're more clear, less maybe process related, and more about what the expectations of what the supervisor is aiming to achieve. With respect to ICP 10, so currently there's two ICPs, 10 and 11, which focus on enforcement action and sanctions, and also preventive and corrective measures. So as the task force took a look at these two ICPs, we thought it would be better to merge the two together. The concepts that covered kind of form a spectrum of supervisory measures, so hopefully that has become more clear, and the flow and logic between those concepts is much more reader-friendly and understandable. Finally, we added a few links to some of the ComFrame material that we thought were needed. So there's the standard 10.3, which is on preventive measures, corrective measures, which now has some links to recovery plans, which I think Urs will talk about later. But and I'll talk about the comments received related to that. So just high-level summary of the comments received. We've received a lot of useful feedback. The task force met last week and had a chance to go through the initially review the comments received. So some of the things we received on the introduction, it was kind of a lack of clarity as to how ComFrame and the ICPs interact. We've tried to hopefully make that clearer, but I think as we try to explain more, sometimes it gets more confusing, but I think we need to be a bit more thoughtful about explaining how that's intended to work. Another comment with respect to the ICP overarching concepts. Again, we tried to say that in addition to the overarching concepts of the ICPs, here's some additional ones with respect to ComFrame, but again, I think we might need to revisit how we explain that. There's also a lot of questions about how proportionality and group-wide supervision applies with respect to IAIGs. So you have that overarching concept in the ICPs, which obviously applies to all insurers, including IIGs. But when you talk about, you're on that specific subset of IIGs, so what does that mean? What does that concept mean in a smaller world? So another thing that we're going to be taking a look at. There was some suggestions for some additional overarching concepts, some related to materiality, confidentiality, data protection. So we're taking a look at those to consider. With respect to confidentiality, there is material in ICP2, which will be out for consultation shortly, as well as some of the material in ICP3 that Tom might touch on that's more focused on data exchange and information exchange between supervisors. So we'll be taking a look to what ways we can make sure that those ideas are covered, whether in specific ICPs or whether it's necessary to add those as overarching concepts. We did get a number of comments that seemed to suggest or that seemed to imply that the IAIS was suggesting that supervisors, in order to meet the objectives of the ICPs, should act outside the boundaries of their authorities or against the law, which it's not the intention. I know some people think the IAIS comes up with crazy ideas sometimes, but having supervisors break the law is not one of them. So we'll take a look to see if we need to better clarify that, but certainly not to intend. That's not the intention. Finally, with respect to the introduction material, there was a lot of questions about what happens with the IIG criteria. This is currently in what was formerly Module 1 of ComFrame. So with that is material that is in the process of being integrated, so it wasn't part of this consultation. So that criteria does still exist. But we'll be going through the process of looking at that and integrating it, and whether it needs to be in the introduction itself or in other ComFrame material, that will be subject to further work. Finally, with respect to ICPs 9 and 10, I think we just received some rather specific comments which were helpful. There's some new material that talks about the role of external auditor, and this was to reflect, I think, some general improvements across the standard setting worlds to better highlight the role of the external auditor. So these were added as new guidance. Though there seems to be a lack of clarity about the expectations, there seems to be some confusion that we're suggesting that the external auditor acts like the supervisor, which was not the case, or is not the intention, so we'll be taking a look at that. With respect to reporting requirements, there are some concerns that we were suggesting that reporting requirements could change frequently in order to get additional information that the supervisor might need. But we'll take a look at those, because there's obviously the set reporting requirements that are annual, but then there's the idea that the supervisor should be able to get ad hoc information as need be. So there was some confusion on those. Finally, there was a lot of questions and comments about the expectations for recovery plans and whether the location of the material in ICP 10 was the most appropriate place. So again, I think that's something that ERS will be looking at as a resolution-related topic, and we'll try to be figuring out how that works out and to be more clear on that. So that's the high-level summary for the introductions in ICP 9 and 10. Any questions on these? Okay. If not, I'll turn things over to Tom.
Good morning. So I'm going to talk about the ComFrame content in ICPs 9 and 10. You've just heard from Ryan about the feedback on the ICP text itself. And then I'm going to talk about the feedback we've had on ICP 3 and 25, which deals with confidentiality and supervisory cooperation. And for each of those two areas, I'll give you a quick summary as to what we were proposing, and then I'll try and pull out the highlights from your feedback to those. So the first area then is the ComFrame material in ICPs 9 and 10. Obviously, there has been some restructuring of this material, as has already been mentioned, but the core sort of proposals which we put forward are in three areas. One is to have more structure around the supervisory review process, so that for internationally active insurance groups, we're setting a minimum level of supervisory work that should be undertaken. And in particular, that assessment, the sort of group-wide risk assessment, should be done at least annually. And there's a more detailed list of what the components of that annual assessment should include. Secondly, there's a requirement then for IAIGs to develop a recovery plan. Urs will probably say more about recovery and resolution later on. And then the third thing which has been introduced reflects decisions made in the IAIS several years ago, but that is for groups which are headed by a unregulated financial holding company. It's not just where they're headed by a regulated insurer, but for those groups, then the group-wide supervisor should have some direct powers to hold the head of the IAIG responsible for compliance with the standards. That's what we proposed. What did you say? The first thing which you raised was a concern about confidentiality when we are undertaking some peer group analysis as part of that supervisory review process. So obviously we're all used to sharing information between regulators where there are regulators involved in the same insurance group, but it's a powerful tool for regulators to be able to make a comparison between different groups, and that requires some sharing of information between regulators of different groups. Your concern is around the confidentiality of the information which is needed to be shared as part of that peer group analysis. Second area is that the assessment of the sort of financial strength of the group necessarily includes an assessment of some of the non-regulated or non-financial entities in a group. And you're looking for more clarity around how we will go about assessing those aspects. We thought also that it would be good for supervisors to undertake on-site inspections jointly. That, from our point of view, is efficient. From your point of view, you said that you would like your consent before such joint inspections took place. And then on the field testing, I really haven't much to say there because, as has already been mentioned, the responses to the field testing type questions, the cost-benefit analysis, it's probably premature, I think, for you to be able to give us a lot of detailed information on that whilst our proposals are still being developed. Now, turning to the question of direct powers over the head of the IAIG, your response was that such powers should be formulated only as guidance rather than as a requirement. That obviously would mean that there's no need then to change any of the current legislative arrangements which give supervisors their powers. And we also asked a question about whether those powers which we think should be available to be exercised directly should be specified in more detail. And none of the responses to that question thought that they needed to be set out in any more granular fashion. Where we've got groups which are international, there is a difficulty in applying direct powers against the head of the group, which might be in a different jurisdiction to where the group supervisor has his authority. There obviously only indirect approaches can be taken to enforcing our standards, and you're looking for more clarity about how that sort of indirect process would work. I won't say any more about the cost benefits questions there, that they were no more enlightening on ICP 10 than they were 9. So turning now to the ICP revisions in ICP 3 on confidentiality and ICP 25 on supervisory cooperation. The changes here are very much more sort of structural changes to try and simplify the text. In particular, there are a lot of overlaps between those two ICPs, confidentiality requirements being sort of reinforced throughout. We've tried to shorten a lot of the material and put all of the confidentiality-related issues into ICP 3, and that's led to a significant shortening of ICP 25, something like half the length that it was previously. And I think that improves readability and usability. We've tried to clarify some concepts when information is shared, that it needs to be shared only where there's a legitimate interest and where there's a valid supervisory purpose for sharing information. And we've tried to give more clarity around those aspects. And then structurally, the other thing which has happened is to take a lot of material which was previously in ICP 26 and break that up and insert it in more relevant ICPs. So that has led to material related to cross-border cooperation rather than being part of sort of recovery and resolution, being part of the cooperation and functioning of colleges in ICP 25. For ICP 25, no major changes intended here to any of the substance. Important, I think, we've said to, when choosing who should be the group-wide supervisor, to have regard to the need to have some direct powers over the head of the group. That's a factor which should be taken into consideration. And we've maintained the requirements for IAIGs to establish colleges as the forum through which a lot of information exchange will take place. That's not a requirement for other types of insurance group. And then, again, for IAIGs, whilst colleges exist, we've introduced a requirement for there specifically to be a crisis management group in order to coordinate during crises. That may be a part of the college, but it needs to be clearly identifiable. So that's what we've proposed. What did you say? So a lot of comments are related to just clarifying the text in certain areas. What do we mean by information? What do we mean by supervisors and other authorities? Obviously, in a crisis situation, it won't just be the supervisory authorities that need to cooperate. It may be wider. I think the main theme coming through here was trying to make it clear that having put all the confidentiality requirements into ICP 3, that those requirements do attach to any form of information exchange, no matter what the process is by which that comes about. So that's reflected in your feedback on ICP 25, where previously you saw lots of requirements of confidentiality and now they've been removed. The intention is not to make information exchange and cooperation outside the scope of confidentiality, but you're worried that we haven't made that clear enough. So we'll look at some better form of cross-referencing, I suspect, between those two standards. You're concerned also about the general sort of broadness of information that can be shared. So looking at ICP 25, then again, comments around proportionality and the decision-making process as well. So ICP 25 introduces colleges as a requirement for cooperation for IAIGs. Our intention is not for the college to become a decision-making body, and perhaps that didn't come through clearly enough in what we have said. The decisions obviously rest with the relevant supervisors, and for group matters, they'll rest with the group-wide supervisor. So we're not interfering with the national powers that exist that give us our powers or trying to alter the decision-making responsibilities that individual supervisors had through introducing college arrangements. And then on the ComFrame text in ICP 25, You were keen, I think particularly where we've got crisis situations, for the IAIG's, the group's own management to be involved in setting up those arrangements. And that may well be a good thing in terms of consulting with you as to how everybody would react during a crisis. And I'll conclude again just by saying we haven't had very much concrete feedback on the cost-benefit aspects that we were consulting on. So I hope that's helpful as a summary of what we've said and what you have replied to us with. I'm happy to take 1 or 2 questions if anybody would like me to elaborate on anything further. Okay, in which case I'll hand back to Halbeisen, who's going to talk about recovery and resolution.
Good morning. I would like to actually give you an update on ICP 12. Now, maybe also as my colleagues before, quickly going through what ICP 12 and the ComFrame materials integrated contained, and what was the reason actually for the revision of ICP 12. Many of you know the existing ICP 12 has only 2 standards and applies only to legal entities. We also had, after the financial crisis, quite a bit of a development in the international arena about the resolution. First of all, of course, from the banking side, but the key attribute of effective resolution regimes issued by the Financial Stability Board all is generally to the financial sector. It is in regards to systemically important financial institution, which also covers insurers. Now, what we have done now with the ICP 12, it's quite a bit expanded. That was also the intention, and also to have a structure in it. It includes also ComFrame text, and it focuses on the exit from the market, both voluntarily exit and forced exit and resolution. The recovery part, as you have heard, is in ICP 10 integrated and currently in 10.3, and sits also the corresponding ComFrame text beneath 10.3. The structure of ICP 12 is done like the voluntary exit from the market, but then also when it comes to resolution, it goes into the details of the objectives, what's the planning, the cooperation and coordination. It goes into triggers, the powers, which is a quite extensive list of powers. So we respect that, but we see that more as a toolbox where you apply the one which suits best for the actual situation. It goes into liquidation, and finally then safeguards, and at the end issues to specific groups and branches. There we try to address about the resolution of insurance groups, and especially when it comes to liquidation, it's clear that a liquidation only can be done for a legal entity, not on a whole group at the same time, but we try to actually put in there some caveat how to actually best liquidate legal entities belonging to a group. Also contains branch aspects. Of course, we promote also the traditional instruments in the insurance sector of resolution, namely the portfolio transfer, runoff, but also going into restructuring and liquidation. With that, that's about the what we have in ICP 12, and now going into the comments. And I have to say, after we had a informal consultation last August, I was hoping for a little bit less comments. But we received about 1,200 comments on the ICP 12 and another 245 only in respect of 10.3, which deals with the recovery. We had about 35% of the comments were about resolution planning, so that certainly seems to be a hot topic. As Otto mentioned already, in respect of the field testing questions, here we go only about 3 to 6 responses per question. That is not really helpful, but we have probably to look at ourselves, because apparently we didn't formulate the questions good enough. We also had 2 specific questions in ICP 12. One was whether the power of temporarily stay on early termination rights associated with derivatives and securities financing transactions should only be available to AAGs or be extended to other insurers. And then we had another question to seek input regarding guidance and specific issues to groups, but we only got 4 responses to these questions. So that's, we have to try to address that in a different way going forward. Now, coming then to the areas where we received comments. We had our resolution working group. This is a drafting team who is dealing with this text, and we had the chance to go through a lot of these comments. About 2 weeks ago, we had a 2-day drafting meeting, so we got a little bit of an impression what comments we received, but I have to say we are far from actually putting up a resolution to the comments we received from you. But at this point, we definitely like to thank you for all the comments, because they are really helpful and will help us in further reshaping that in a way that is understandable, it's clear, and is also appropriate to the resolution of insurance legal entities, but also can be applied in the context of groups. Now, one set of comments, they stressed the importance of the cross-border cooperation and coordination among supervisors and resolution authorities. Here, I think that's something which we have to also maybe cross-reference to ICP 25. ICP 25 contains actually these cooperation and coordination requirements. So here we have to see that the interlinkages just works better. The similar thing is also a lot of comments stressed that the issue of confidentiality, which should be ensured when sharing information. And you have heard that we have concentrated that in ICP 3. So also here we need to get a better interlinkage. Then another area was the importance of the proportional application. And it's clear that here, for some of the proposed requirements, also in respect when it comes to resolution, but also maybe quicking aside thing to recovery, which is in 10.3, how that exactly should apply to what level of company, about GSII, AIGs, larger IAGs, smaller ones, and then maybe then even in general. So that certainly needs, from our end, some more consideration and explanation. There were also some comments on group issues, also including how to address resolution of the head of the group, as well as to non-insurance entities and foreign branches. That's again an area which probably needs further elaboration and details. Then several commenters said that there should be flexibility in triggers for the intervention. That certainly was the intention, but maybe we have also had to add here certain context. And then we also received some comments on the cost of recovery and resolution planning, how costly this is, so that we take that on board. Now, in respect of how do we proceed from a IAIS perspective and from also from a resolution working group perspective, we will continue to work on the resolution of the comments and will fine-tune then the text of the ICPs as well as a ComFrame text in accordance with the IAIS overarching time schedule. For some of the comments, we are also considering if it would be worthwhile to develop an application paper and resolution to address some of the technical comments which we received. With that, I'm at the end and I'm open for any question you may have. It's again not the case, so I would like to hand over to Annick.
Good morning, everybody. I will explain a little bit more about the governance material, the ComFrame material on governance. In 2014, we already field tested a draft ComFrame material on governance, which was considerably longer than the draft which we consulted recently. There were some reasons for this. The field tested draft had a lot of standards and parameters. We still had parameters at that time, which copied the ICPs. And we have removed now all the overlap, and we also adjusted the text to the new term insurer, how it's used in the ICPs. Furthermore, we also already included some of the field testing comments in the ICP revision in 2015, because we felt that these issues were relevant for all insurers and not just for IAIGs. So we had revised our ComFrame material, and of course there are several reasons for the revisions which have already been explained by the speakers before me. There are also some additional ones specific for governance material. First of all, of course, we addressed the overall outcomes of the field testing exercise and accommodated the comments of the field testing participants. But we also took into account the revisions to ICP 5, 7, and 8, which were published in November 2015, because ComFrame is building on the ICPs, so we should adjust to that. And we also took into account some new international standards from the Joint Forum, and we're also looking more broadly what was new on governance in the international field. So we received not so many comments as Urs did on recovery and resolution, but we still highly appreciate all your comments. And maybe you allow me to give me the opportunity to give you one small piece of advice for future consultations. We found out that several respondents coordinated their comments, which is very fine, but then sent in literally the same text, same comments to us again, with sometimes a small additional comment or small diverging comment. And so for next time, it would be very useful for you and very helpful for us if you would clarify clearly where you have something additional or something diverging, because we easily overlook this small additional sentence if you have pages and pages of literally the same text. So just to help us taking into account all your comments, please clarify next time where you have something additional. Just some main highlights of the comments we received. A lot of comments on the ICPs themselves, although these were not up for consultation, in particular for ICP 5, and unfortunately we cannot take these into account because there were already, ICPs were already published, were already revised, and they were only published as background material to be able to understand the ComFrame material. Well, there were also, we received comments on stating that ComFrame should not deviate from the ICPs. Of course, ComFrame is built on the ICPs, but the purpose of ComFrame is to provide more requirements specifically for IAIGs. So in this context, I would like to refer to the objectives which Elise already explained. And this is also that sometimes ComFrame requires stricter or has more stricter requirements than the ICPs. So we received quite a few requests for clarifications. And sometimes we understand it's good to have the view of the objective reader and see how you can read the different texts. So we will clarify sometimes. Also, it's sometimes clear that the ComFrame material is misunderstood, so we need to provide more clarification. But in some cases, we feel that it will be sufficient to provide an explanation in the resolution of the comments, which will be published together with the ComFrame material. It seems also necessary to clarify in general more how ComFrame is constructed and how it should be read and interpreted. And this is something which Ryan already mentioned. We received also several concerns that ComFrame seems to be designed for more centralized governance structures rather than also for decentralized governance structures. Like the ICPs and like our issues and applications paper, ComFrame is meant to be for all, to be applicable for all governance structures, and is not meant to favor a specific approach. As long as the governance approach allows to observe all the requirements, then it's fine with us. So there's the same issue with the application of ComFrame to different types of insurers, like mutuals or joint stock companies. ComFrame is meant to apply to every type of insurer. We also received some comments on the frequency. We have, or even many comments, we have for several activities, we have included a requirement that there should be something carried out on an annual basis. It was suggested to change that to regular or periodically. The issue is that often in the ICPs, this is already periodically or regularly required. So we would have to look whether we really want to have a stricter requirement in ComFrame or not. Some comments suggest that there is a misunderstanding about the role of the group control functions at the level of the head of the IAIG, and this is also something we have to clarify. Just mentioning very shortly on proportionality and materiality, Ryan already mentioned that point. We got comments stating that we should reflect more the proportionality principle and also include more on materiality. Looking at the comments, sometimes these two concepts were sort of mixed up. So we will have a look how we can clarify that. And but I would also like to stress here that we are talking about ComFrame and about IAIGs, which are big insurers. Which means that proportionality, it goes in both ways. You can have stricter requirements, or you can do it in a less complex way. For IAIGs, proportionality will often mean that you will raise the bar in case of some groups instead of lower the bar. So we will have a look there how we can accommodate those comments. Well, lastly, there were some concerns about the level of application of requirements. In many cases, we thought there was a misunderstanding what was meant by a standard saying that the group-wide supervisor should address some requirements towards the head of the IAIG. It does not mean, such requirements do not mean to say that the group-wide supervisor should interfere with the competences of the local supervisors responsible for the legal entities, which are part of the IAIGs, or that the head of the IAIG should manage those entities instead of their own boards. Those requirements are aimed at ensuring that the IAIGs is being supervised by the group-wide supervisor and managed by the IAIG board. And of course, ComFrame really focuses more at the group-wide level than at the entity level. So maybe we should clarify this perspective better, either in our own ComFrame material or more overall. So there were also other topics mentioned in your comments, and we will, of course, pay due attention to it. And if there's anything you would like to ask me now, I give you the floor. No? Then I turn to Paolo.
So good morning, everybody. Compared to my colleagues, which have been dealing with issues which have already been published and so on, I think it's important because we're discussing about a paper which still has to be published to provide you with a bit more of a background. So what I would like to cover is more about the feature of what you're likely to expect on ICS version 1.0 for extended field testing, explaining to you what extended field testing means in practice, issues which are covered or you can expect to be covered in the document, and issues which are supposed not to be covered in the document because will be dealt a bit later in the process, and also discuss about ICS and ComFrame very briefly. And also about the next steps, because I think you're quite eager to understand what will happen later. So first of all, what is quite important to say is that when we talk about the ICS, we talk about something which is developed in a truly international way. I remember when I embarked in this journey, which 2012, 2013, the field, at the time, the group in charge of developing all this issue was called Field Testing Task Force. And they was made up of only 12 supervisors from 2 or 3 jurisdictions, actually probably 4. Now I'm talking about an international group made up of 40 to 45 international supervisors coming from more than 30 jurisdictions and covered all continents, Europe, Asia, North America, and so on. And we also have requests coming to us every time. This is quite important that this offered us with an opportunity to learn from each other. It's not an easy task, and everybody knows that developing a standard like the ICS is not an easy task. It's quite complex. It requires a deep understanding because, as I said more than once, people are very jealous about the system and sometimes not willing to listen to each other. But we learn to listen to each other and understand each other over this journey. And as a testimony of that is that the number of members has been increasing over time, but also the number of volunteers has been increasing over time. When we started, we were 20 the first year, 30 the second year, 40, and now we're over 50 volunteers. And also important that volunteers are learning in this journey, and we are learning to interact with the volunteers, and volunteers are learning to interact with us. This is a quite important experience. There are feedback loops which come from volunteer to us and from us to volunteers. What we also learn over this journey is actually that financial market theory that works in deep, liquid, and transparent market not necessarily works in emerging markets. So when you're developing a global standard, it is quite important to bear this perspective in mind and to understand that we are dealing with international active insurance groups which may be operating not only on developed jurisdiction, on developed markets, but also on emerging markets, and things may be totally different. You have to be patient with us as well because identification of solution which works for every market are not easy to achieve and may take a bit of time. Clear example is interest rate risk approach. And we got markets where interest rates are pretty high, inflation is high, growth is high. And you got markets like Switzerland where you can get negative interest rate up to 20, 30 years. And trying to find an approach which works for both type of markets may be not easy to achieve. And and it requires more than one iteration. And you've seen that through the field testing, we change our approach on a year-to-year basis. Also quite important that, paraphrasing JFK, that we are not doing that because it's easy, but because it is difficult, and also because we are a bit masochist, I would add. I mean, it's important to understand also that what extended field testing means, we try to explain probably, is not clear enough, but extended field testing means to have more volunteer groups and more groups in general. You notice a change in the use of the word. We used to call volunteer IIGs last year. This year we call volunteer groups because we intended extended field testing to be broadened to also firms which not necessarily are IIGs, but may be interested in understanding how it works for them. And we received requests to this end, and we got pushed and say, why only IIGs can participate in an exercise? We said, no, this is not restricted to you. It will apply to IIGs, but if you're willing to participate and understand how it works, you can certainly do that. It also includes data requests extended, and these are to try to assess policy and technical issue, and try to resolve policy issue in the ramp up to 2.0, which is the one that matters, which is the one about implementation. And over time, we will provide you more clarification about what implementation means. This is something which is quite important and may get people very kind of itchy, frustrated, and irritated. This is quite important for you. We understand that. And also, it's quite important that we're trying to resolve lots of technical issues, and we make the best use of interaction with you, your data, your feedback, and so on. Compared to previous year, we tried to reduce the number of options, not necessarily the number of data we request, but the number of options. And as an example, in terms of last year, we had 6 options for the market-adjusted valuation approach. We went down to 3 this year. On morbidity and disability, we had 2 different approaches. This year, we have a single approach. For interest rate risk, for GAP Plus, we had 2 methods last year. We have only 1 this year, and so on. And also, we are continuing to explore issues on important parts of the framework, like capital resources, which we understand and we know is fundamental for the success of this framework. There are also innovations in this year field testing, like a simulation tool. We are in Windsor here, which is very close to Legoland. So when you think about the simulation tool, think about a Lego approach to build the ICS and to come out to test different assumptions, different hypotheses, and come out with a different solvency ratio. And I'm pretty sure our volunteers and our firms will enjoy that. But now, talking about why did you need to issue, what is the difference between the document you're going to see in mid-July, which is the ICS version 1.1 for extended field testing and the field testing package. Okay, there's no difference when it comes to the content in terms of the technical and policy choices, which you'll find these two packages are the same. However, the audience to which this document is intended for is different. When we talk about the field testing package, it's for field testing volunteers. It's like a long list of instruction on how to calculate the different options and assumptions. We appreciate that this may not be digestible for everybody, and stakeholders may be more interested in the narrative behind what is in the field testing technical specification. So rather than having to read 340 pages of technical instruction, which may be more suitable for actuaries, we provide you a bit of more of the narrative and a bit of the rationale why we're doing that. So there is a less technical description, less number of pages, and you don't need to fill in any template. You don't need to fill any of the 70,000 plus cells which are in the field testing package. You don't have to fill the 347 questions which are in the questionnaire. However, in this document, you may be able to provide feedback. It's not a consultation document, but there will be an address link on which you may provide feedback with respect to different parts of the document. Also quite important, we're using this document also to explain you how we took into account the feedback received on the consultation document 2016. In terms of the component of the ICS addressed by this document and the field testing packages, feedback package are exactly the same. It deals with capital resources, capital requirements based on the standard method, the scope of the group, and valuation in the two flavors of MAV and GAP+. Quite important as well to highlight what is not covered here. These are important issues. You need to appreciate we cannot address all the issues in a single way. These are very important issues. It's not that we have forgotten about that. These are at the top of the agenda of EXCO. And it is also for this reason that recently EXCO created a subgroup, which is a subgroup of members, which is devoted to provide steer and making sure that ICS 2.0 gets delivered in time, and is an ICS task force. This is a quite important thing, and this is also going to help us in providing answer about what the implementation for ICS 2.0 will mean, and so on. We also, when it comes to cost and benefit analysis, the field testing provides us with a quantitative impact. We need to get a bit more of the qualitative information we will try to get through the questionnaire on a year-by-year basis, but also quite important that some of the benefits, the incremental cost and benefits of implementing this framework will depend on what forms 2.0 will take, what is the implementation chosen for that, and also what type of option we are going for. Important to highlight that the ICS is part of ComFrame. At the same time, ICS requires lots of work, and not necessarily and some of the, whereas it's easy to develop the part of ComFrame which may not be related directly to the ICS, considering the moving parts of the ICS, it's not easy to integrate them all together at the same time. So that may require a bit of time. And it's quite important to highlight that ICS is the quantitative part of ComFrame. The qualitative ComFrame contains also the qualitative parts. And also, we need to develop a bit better probably the qualitative parts of ComFrame which relates to the ICS going forward. And this is something which may be developed only in a sequential manner. Once you have clear in mind what the objectives is, you may be clearer about what to do. Now, concluding in terms of the steps and what you can expect from us in the near future. In mid-2017, which is just now, just EXCO approved the ICS version 1.0 for extended field testing. It approved in May the release of the field testing package. It approved yesterday the release of the document, subject to some editorial changes. you understand that it's maybe it's a bit pedantic, but going through all the kind of formatting thing may take a bit more time. We want to make sure this is done correctly. So watch your space in July, because this document will be published about mid-July. Important to also to understand in September 2017, this is the time when the data is due for the field testing process, and this is also when we start resuming discussion for version 2.0, because we also will have the new data coming to us to be analyzed, which may provide some of the answers or help us to provide some of the answers which we are expecting. And important to highlight that next year field testing will not start in May as usual, we'll start in April. The reason is we're trying to run an 11-month cycle for the simple reason that we want to make sure that we can use the data in 2019 to feed into the approval process of the ICS 2.0 final version. Then mid-2018, what you can expect is the ICS 2.0 document for consultation, and also the parts of ComFrame which are not related to the ICS, not integrated together, but you'll find this, you will have a better view of what the overall package will look like. In data next year will not be due in September, like as usual, but will be due in August, 1 month early. And then comments for 2.0 and the ComFrame consultation will have to be received, will have to be submitted to us by October, November. Then, as you can see, the 11-month cycle means that in 2019 we will start in March, not in April, and the data will not be due in August like 2018, but in July. And in order to be able to take more informed decision at the IAIS 2019 general meeting, where the ICS 2.0 will be adopted. So that concludes my bit, so I can take 1 or 2 questions. I hope you have not reserved all the questions for me. George. Yep.
Just a fundamental question on the timelines. Will you also be scheduling the various issues that you will be addressing as you review the ICS? We had a description, I guess, in La Jolla of the various component parts that you were trying to tackle as you met your deadline for version 1.0, and as going forward, it's extremely helpful also to know those elements.
If I have to be totally honest, I hope so, that we'll be able to make things and we'll be able to take decision in a sequential way. I also recognize as well there are different souls within our organization, and some that would like to take all decisions at the end, more an holistic approach. And from a project management perspective, I agree with you, I would prefer to take sequential decision, close a chapter and move to the next one. But we will let you know, and this is one of the tasks as well that the ICS task force made up of EXCO member is supposed to provide steer with. This is quite important, and this task force will meet quite often, at least over the phone in the summer, so that when we start our discussion on 2.0, we have a clear idea, we can provide a bit of more idea of when decisions are likely to be taken, so that you can also plan the stakeholders meeting and your intervention as well.
Okay, I appreciate that. And it woke me up when you mentioned this new EXCO task force or subgroup that will be looking at these and providing greater steering, because as you know, there's a lot of technical work getting done, but there are extremely important foundational questions that we still have, and we'll have an opportunity to talk directly with EXCO this afternoon, but to learn more about what the purpose and role of that subgroup is.
It's
very
to provide steer, certain things which we cannot solve at the technical level, we cannot solve like that when, you will be fool to deny there are not issues which cannot be resolved on a technical way. There are some issues which are at the core of the discussion, we not necessarily are technical. And we need steer, we need people which have the power to provide steer and this on site. So this to help the delivery, as I said, is to help a smooth delivery of ICS 2.0.
I'm happy for you that you have
Yeah.
that.
Sorry? Yeah. But you can ask EXCO as well about this question.
Just one more question.
No, I've got to, one more.
Thank you. I have a, this is Morik from the Philadelphia Consulting Group. I have a slightly broader question, so it's, if you'd rather, Elise, rather take a specific question for Paolo, because mine really goes to broader panel question.
We're actually over time already, so if we, we can catch, we can catch any of the speakers at the break, if you don't mind, so we can keep this on schedule. I would appreciate it. So, thank you very much. Thank you, panelists. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Hello. Just housekeeping announcement. So, excuse me, just housekeeping announcement. So the next session will start 11 o'clock. And just to, as Elise mentioned, sorry we did not have sufficient time for Q&A, but I'm sure that, like one ICP received 1,200 comments, so I'm sure that you have questions. So please directly ask our, panel speakers during the coffee break, and hopefully next session ICS when we have enough time to debate. Good, thank you.